Happy Tuesday to you. I'm Clint Skutchan, Senior Vice President of the Organized Real Estate Division here at T360. And so we're going to do a high-level overview today of some of the things that we're working on within our division to help associations and MLSs think forward against, a lot of the headlines that are being shared today, a lot of unknowns. And so we want to share some of the things that we think are known that you can start to do to work ahead and get in front of any compensation shifts that may occur in the coming months. So thanks for joining us, whether live or on the recorded version. We certainly appreciate you. With me is Liz Tewksbury, who's joined my division here a few months ago and has just been a tremendous partner. And I wanted to introduce her because we haven't really, I know we've had selective introductions, but kind of a chance to introduce yourself to a broader audience here, Liz. So why don't you do so? Tell them a little bit about your background and some of your specialties.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me, everybody. My name is Liz Tewksbury, and as Clint said, I'm part of the Organized Real Estate Division here at T3. I come over here with about 13 years of experience in the MLS world. Started off at a large regional MLS, where I learned a lot about the technology and operational aspects of our wonderful industry. And then from there, I actually went over and learned things a little bit differently in the vendor space, a lot about relationships and even more about technology, and brought that all over here to T3 and am now working directly with MLSs, again, more on that operational and technical aspect. So everything from MLS system evaluations to rolling my sleeves up and helping now with implementations with some of our MLS partners.
Yeah, and even looking just at efficiency gains, it doesn't necessarily have to be wholesale change in order to get to a higher level of performance. And it's a matter of where you're able to go down into the level of details that frankly I don't dare go. It's nice to have.
We're a well-rounded team for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump us into the screen here and share. We've got a little bit of a presentation for you today. And so let's see if we can fire this up, and we're going to walk through this again, keeping it largely at a very high level here in terms of introducing this concept. I think, what we really wanted to do with this today is, get folks into that evaluation and prepare mindset for what we believe. And you've been hearing from our company over the last couple of months, really honing in a letter that was sent out to the industry saying, now is the time to take action. And so for our part, we wanted to spend some time thinking through what does that mean for organized real estate. And in terms of organized real estate, probably good we throw that term around a lot. It's known for us, but what that means is we're largely living in that MLS and association world and applying all the residential real estate kind of activities against that. So we're going to walk through this today. Our focus is really to think through those anticipated shifts, the long-standing impact that this could have on the value proposition of co-op and comp. Those two have always kind of been married, I think, and especially in the MLS environment. The idea here is that the compensation piece could be devalued, could go away altogether, depending on what the outcome is here. And so while we're not going to hone in what we think the outcome is going to be, what we're going to do is going to stand up, what are the potential strategic and business planning impacts, including measures that, like I said, you can be taken now and doing so in a proactive aspect to evaluate and look at your strategies and business operations. And I think this will help just the mindset of if we're doing activities to help assess ourselves and think through our strengths and maybe some areas where we're not as strong moving forward, gives us that opportunity to feel a little bit more in control of what's going on around us rather than just looking to headlines every day to disrupt and move us beyond what we can control. Primary readiness considerations that we're going to cover here today: organizational value proposition and philosophy at the highest level. We want to look at some strategic planning considerations. There's a great deal of that in these potential outcomes. We want to talk about subscriber and member intelligence, getting to know specific aspects of your membership or subscribers, depending on whether you're association versus an MLS. Will help you to feel a little more confident about that. And much of that will lead into your financial preparedness. There's some potential here, even through this market correction that we're seeing, of seeing some loss of membership and subscribers. And so what does that do? And what do we need to be working forward on? There's, of course, policies, impacts here, some of your procedures, even your general practices that we can touch on. Almost everything has a technology underpinning to it. So we want to touch on that. supported by the education and awareness. We will not be diving into the legal aspects today. So if you're tuning into the legal aspects, that is not our expertise in this format. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. So we'll focus on these other areas instead. So jumping in at the highest level, kind of your value proposition and philosophy, some of this is just going to come down to talking amongst with your leadership, your staff members, and really just starting to determine how heavily vested are you in compensation as a part of your value proposition, cooperation compensation. How much has that just been something that we've relied on? This compulsion to be a part of this industry. In many instances, you have to be a realtor member in order to join an MLS, and you have to, if you're in a realtor office, join as an agent. All these different pieces has meant that in many instances, that compensation piece was just relied on. It was, well, this is how we get you to getting paid at the end of the day. Which leads to, those leadership conversations and having some time planned for this. We get busy with doing the busy work. We know that's true. There's lots going on, but we find a lot of MLSs now are setting aside time either before where they grab a lunch and there's no agenda. There's just, let's talk about some of these things that are going on. What is our philosophy? What are some of our value propositions beyond the compensation structure? So taking some time to have some free conversation is one of those pieces that you can do proactively. Looking at what is being shared with your subscribers and members that might maybe be really more heavily focused on the compensation aspect rather than the cooperation. We've heard a lot of leaders in the industry talking about doubling down on cooperation. And so how do you convey that message? How do you set up for that now, emphasizing those elements of the MLS that are really valuable? And Liz, while it's not been the ideal situation or circumstance, I think over the last couple of weeks with some of these MLS outages, the marketplaces and the agents and the brokers, especially because we have so many new folks, this idea of cooperation became much more clear over the last few weeks when we've been hearing from folks around the country. I don't know if you had any kind of observations that you've taken from that, but for me, it's been interesting. It's like you forget that, oh yeah, well, obviously there's cooperation until there's not an ability to cooperate, and then all of a sudden that is elevated in terms of importance.
Yeah, no, we've seen some really great examples of cooperation in our industry, not only from MLSs that are helping others that were affected, but also we're seeing MLSs helping out brokerages, right? So typically we see brokerages working together, or we see MLSs working together. So to see that line sort of cross and have an MLS help a brokerage has been great. We've also seen some really great prop tech vendors who were starting in this space or even considering where their mark may be, really leap forward and do some amazing things to get some MLSs back up and running and get their agents back up and running. So it's been really great to watch.
And to get the marketplace back up and running, which again, I think we do think about cooperation amongst the brokers and agents primarily, but in this case, it kind of does take a village. It takes that MLS entity, takes the technology providers, takes the brokerage and agent folks working together as well. So I think these are things that you can be thinking through and talking about now. This is an interesting one, and this is one that we're hearing more and more about, is the realtor ownership of the MLS. Wholly owned, partially owned, what does that mean in terms of some of the litigative outcomes? What does it mean for policy implementation? And just what does it allow you to do or not do? And this was like almost something that was coup de grace. You didn't talk about it. It was just not there. But now I think people are assessing this and whether or not it's healthy for the realtor organization to be the only owner of the MLS in this environment, or whether it's healthy for the MLS to be so beholden to a singular stakeholder. So I think these are really hard conversations, but better to be having them now because not knowing where things could end up. We haven't even talked about really outside of the litigation piece. There's the regulatory environment still unknown as to what the DOJ may or may not do. And so I think these are conversations don't have to decide on today, but you have to maybe open up this box that's been shut for a long time and start to think these through from a philosophical standpoint. Moving down out of the philosophical into the kind of where you meet your philosophical with your practical, and that's your strategic planning. One thing that we've seen in some instances around the country is that in particular for MLSs, because inherently co-op and comp has been, that's what we do, that's who we are, that's how we operate. If you are one of those entities that has a heavy emphasis on the compensation in your mission and vision statement, you probably need to start rolling that back and rethinking what that looks like. In most places, what we've been seeing over the last few years is a lot of more about the what we just talked about, making the marketplace work, fulfilling that piece of what the MLS's role is. So that's a quick and easy one, just reviewing those mission and vision statements, making sure that they don't overly lean into the compensation piece that could change. Really important here is that you have a clear understanding of your core competencies if you're an MLS and what your core services are as an association. And in most instances, they may be complementary, but they should not be one and the same, where your core competencies for an MLS and services for an association are all blended together. We really want to have those clearly defined. And in particular, as we head into this, next version of what cooperation might look like, we think that there's advancements and changes that are going to be occurring around this. For an association, professionalism always an important thing. It's been important over the last couple of years because of the influx of people into the industry. It could become important now that you have to act and really be the voice for professionalism as a scarcity mentality kicks in more than maybe what we've seen over the last few years. Scenario planning, we've heard a lot about this at a leadership level and talking about, what could the outcomes of this be? I think it's important to include scenario planning with your other key volunteers and staff members. Get it down to that lower level and help them to understand things might shift. And if they do, how do we get ahead of that? And how do we function and act differently? So then the entirety of the organization starts thinking forward on this. So if we just keep it at the high level strategic scenario outcome based level, it doesn't then filter down into the folks that actuate a lot of these. And so we've got to start to get them thinking about the need for operating and acting differently. We're seeing a ton of collaboration networks forming across the country. In fact, I think we're tracking over 1 million subscribers now being part of an MLS that's participating in one of these collaboration networks. Your MLS grids, your RE distributes, your MLS aligned, the common data platform. There's about 8 of these, but in total, it's up over 1 million folks that are participating in this. Are you in one of these? Are you not in one of these? Should you be in one of these? Do you not want to be in one of these? This needs to be a serious consideration for your strategic planning and not just something that's an afterthought. It should be built in and cooked into some of your priorities. And ultimately, this leads to a real conversation that I think is starting to emerge, which is absorption. For us, what that means is smaller entities just realizing that financially or otherwise may not be best for them to continue to move forward. So they're going to choose to roll up into something larger. Or if you just want to find somebody who's like-minded, similar size, and you want to consolidate to create a larger organization, you can do that. Or do you just feel like, hey, we're here, we're going to go compete? If there's more competition in the marketplace, which we see happening across the country more and more, this is something that you have to have a very clear understanding in your strategic plan about. Subscriber member intelligence, data on demographics seems like a no-brainer, right? But really starting to work ahead, buyer agent percentage. This becomes a critical element. If we see impacts to the buyer agent compensation structure, how many buyer agents do you have overall? I mean, what we typically see in our research is between 15 and maybe as high as 30% that are really focused on just being buyer's agents. But that really then is different amongst cohorts. So think about the younger members that you might have in your organization. Even some of the work we've done and researched around minority members, they tend to be more buyer agent centric when they come into the industry. And so that's something you need to kind of understand and know what might change here if it does become more difficult to be a successful buyer's agent. Overall sales activity, what does that look like? Who's successful? How much of that is really rolled up into the team compositions? We know teams are a struggle for MLSs regardless, but if you look at some of the trend lines, the likelihood of teams being on the other side of any of these compensation shifts becomes more and more likely, and their impact becomes more and more increased. So starting to really think through and understand how many folks are in that team environment and project forward who you might see as being there beyond this. The number of brokerages, really, really important. I would say, especially for those who are looking at the potential impacts financially to brokerages on the other side of this. we're seeing and reading a lot more about brokerage consolidation occurring. Folks that have been in the industry for a long time, they're seeing a shift in the marketplace. There's a likelihood of lawsuits and copycats and those things. And so we're seeing, a lot of consolidation conversations there. So it's likely there's going to be compression around the number of brokerages. How many brokerages do you have? What are your financial structures around that? Do you have high brokerage costs that, for points of entry? I think about resort marketplaces where, there's a high entrant and it's attached to the brokerage. If you see a significant drop in brokerages, does that really have more of an impact on you? So just start to go through those numbers, get some baselines. You don't have to have all the answers, but you need to set a baseline now so that as things start to trend one direction or another, you have some understanding of how quickly to move on your end. And of course, much of what we just talked about goes into your financial preparedness. One of the easiest ones to do and to run right now is to get a clear understanding of the percentage of your fee or dues revenue versus non-fee or non-dues revenue. And what we tend to see around our research is that it's anywhere from 85 to 95%, with the most hovering above 90%, with that dues revenue driving their financial revenue. And so it's really important. So then once you start to understand that, what are the future capabilities? Where are areas where you can excel, and start to really think through and be intentional about diversifying your revenue structure becomes very, very important. We always talk about it and you hear a lot, oh, we need more non-dues, but it always ends up being this afterthought, especially through a growth market like we've seen the last 2 years, where we've seen accelerated numbers of agents and brokers. It just isn't something we get to, right? But I think now it's one of those times to really work ahead. If you're an MLS, what are your technology revenue sharing options? We're seeing a lot of that occurring, especially with larger MLSs. Are there opportunities, again, to form collaboratives that allow you to then leverage more of these technology revenue opportunities? And ultimately, we're seeing this data monetization movement, and you got to plan for that. Are you guys open to it as an organization, not open to it? And if so, then getting really clear about what is our value? Do we have important and interesting information, and how many listings do we have? Because it's no longer about the number of seats that you're filling with subscribers and members in terms of your kind of marketplace impact in this data environment. It's really about the number of data points that you're generating, which means it comes back to your listings. So spending some time on understanding the number of listings, talking about it more in terms of a potential financial impact, not just a general trend line for the marketplace. Expense review. Of course, we should be doing this in any downturn marketplace, but what expenses do you have outlaid against specifically buyers? If we see a decrease in buyer agents, are there expenses in there that we could attribute to that? Right sizing, we had to size up for support and services through the last few years. Do we have to start to work ahead and think about, are we going to have the same subscriber or member counts moving forward? Starting to look at that. And I would say, as we move into some of the other aspects that are going to be valuable, especially for associations to be out there and talking about the potential impacts to not only the industry, but to consumers, we've got a budget to spend some of that messaging and communication dollars to help get that information out there to help the industry as a whole. And this may be where it is that MLS and association partnership leveraging, what they can collectively rather than everybody doing it individually. So moving forward here, policies, procedures, practices. Compensation transparency. This one has become much more topical in the last few weeks, Liz, as we've seen some of the lawsuits that are driving changes to policies, and then even voluntary changes to the policy around whether or not to offer as low as a penny or a dollar, whatever it might be in that structure, versus just the transparency of saying, yes, I'm going to cooperate, but if I'm in my cooperating, know that on the other side of it, there's not a guaranteed payment. So there's this kind of trend line that's happened here. We heard from Katie Johnson and NAR at the recent leadership event, where they basically signed off on the idea that there is inherently no significant dollar value difference between 1 penny and zero. So, we're already hearing about a number of MLSs that are making this change. And Liz, I might give you a chance to chime in on that one, because this is, for me, it's a bit of a messaging change from NAR. And Bright kind of pushed them, I think, compelled the industry to have this conversation. Was there a difference? Is there not a difference? And I think, many are going to see this as one of the liability aspects. And if there's no inherent NAR retribution for the change, then why not, as long as it's clear that this is what's occurring.
Yeah, and when we think about changing our procedures and practices or our policies, I think the first thing that I'd like to advise is that everybody document everything that they have, preserve those documents and make sure that you have them to refer back to before you start making any changes. That'll be a really good exercise for you to also identify the various areas of your organization that may be impacted, right? So Clint touched on your mission statement and your vision statement, but also looking at any of your documentation related to office agreements or agent agreements for when they join your MLS. Looking at your rules and your regulations, your training and education programs. Where are you touching upon compensation that you need to be looking at? And once you get that outlined and preserved, then you can start really meeting internally and thinking about where you might need to make those changes and who you need to be working with to make those changes, because we all know that there's generally task forces or your board that you need to clear these changes through. So maybe start working on what those changes look like, whether it's wording, whether it's the rules change, so that you can get those through an agreement process and a change can be made pretty quickly should you choose to go that route. We
Yeah, I
also
think that last part, Liz, just jumping in there, I think that last part's important is you don't maybe even have to make all the changes right now, but you should assess like how long does it take us to go from we know we need to make a change to being able to make a change. And again, an environment where we don't know how quickly we may or may not have to act. It's a good time to really assess those procedures around your policy updates and say, are there ways which we can expedite decision making if necessary?
Right, right. And then, we also need to look at the technology changes because it will be impacted as well. So things like looking at your listing input forms, whether it's your piece of paper that agents are maybe taking with them, or when they're looking online and seeing if everything lines up there correctly. Are you pushing any of this information out on data feeds? And if not, should you be? What does your public facing website look like today? And do you need to make any changes to your fields? So working with the various vendor partners to ensure that those changes are lined up and launched according to whatever it is your plan, whatever your plan is when the time comes. And then lastly, and Clint touched upon this a little bit, is it really, this is where we, our communication marketing plans, this really kind of rounds out that every department within an MLS will be working on this initiative. So getting your comms and marketing team together to not only work on your internal, but your external communication plan, again, should these changes roll out.
Yeah, several items in there, and I'll come back around to a couple of the technology and the kind of educational aspects here in a moment too. I want to highlight here, we did again as a company issue a call to the industry to really go out there and take hold of these buyer representation agreements and put those into action. So again, that's one of the probably more prominent, more discussed items that have been talked about in terms of policies, procedure changes. But I think that's really important. The other thing that I would kind of, before I move off this policies, procedures, and practices, I'd really go back to this idea of proactive compliance and professionalism in a changing marketplace. People are getting nervous. They're trying to position their businesses for success in a changing marketplace. And so they're going to start to, push the edge of this or that. And I don't begrudge them that, as because they're entrepreneurs. They got to survive through this. They can't wait for it to happen. They don't have inherently, long runways to just wait and see. But under those circumstances, there then is more importance related to making sure that the compliance of the accuracy, the completeness of the data is being preserved through all this, especially as you look at your data diversification and revenue opportunities. It's going to come back to, is your, what you're sending out, is it in fact accurate, timely, all of those things. So compliance from that standpoint becomes important. Professionalism, again, I think becomes important as folks try to alter, different and come up with new ways to ensure, market, like presence. We've got to make sure that that's in alignment with what's really good through this co-opetition that we've had over time. We want to encourage, the competition piece, but we want it not to unravel or undermine any of the cooperation value that, again, we've had highlighted over the last few weeks. I will touch on the technology a little bit in a different way than what Liz does, because she's very much, into the specifics. But for me, I'm more of the, look at it from the high level. So I want to have a comprehensive review done of my tech stack. Again, starting to break it out. What do we have in there that specifically adds value or serves buyer needs, buyer representative needs versus seller specific needs, and breaking that in an understanding. And then from there, looking at what are some of those technology revenues or expenses that might come out of this. And then, a lot of those can come from proactively identifying these shift-related challenges or opportunities. And so, we've heard of folks that are trying to solve for the buyer's agents aren't really able to demonstrate in a, specific quantitative manner all that they do to get a house sold. And so we know some folks that are working to create, technologies that can track that more directly or to do it better. So then there's actual metrics that go behind all of the other nuances and pieces that we know go into being a buyer's agent, but to be able to tell that better. So what kind of opportunities might there be from there? There's always some opportunities. In fact, if you look at the last big significant downturn that happened to our industry, we saw major players like Zillow and others, emerge during those circumstances because they were solving for immediate pain points. So under duress and uncertainty, a lot of times intuition and innovation really come forward, and we see things being done differently than what they've been done before. So I would encourage us as MLSs and associations to be doing that same thinking. Don't necessarily just, send that out for a third party to be doing that. So I think that's important. Liz touched on the last couple here about your vendor agreements and your public display websites. Very, very important. And then we'll close out here with education and awareness. I think this is a must do right away, because this is one of those when something bad happens or something changes, folks want to immediately find someone else to say, well, you didn't tell me, or you didn't do this. And how many times do we hear from association MLS executives, our agents, our brokers don't hear us, they don't read. I think you need to start putting together an inventory of all of your education and awareness activities that you've conducted to date around these lawsuits, and be ready to tell that story of, look, we've tried to say this was important, and we know you were out doing your business and trying to pay bills. We appreciate that, but this is what we've done to prepare you for this. And also then you can package those up into a singular place, make it easy for them to access longer term, but also showing that you've been doing this, for some time. The broker outreach and resources critical, of course. We have a great webinar that was done by our technology, or rather our division that deals with brokerage, but lots of other things. The letter that I mentioned that we sent out to the industry, all that can be found at t360.com/compensation lawsuits. Lots of great resources available for your brokers. I know our brokerage team right now is actually doing some assessment work themselves around what brokerages could be doing to prepare. So giving those resources back out to brokers, great thing to do. And then look at what the shift could be in terms of educational needs after the fact. If there are any changes to the commission structure, what kind of educational needs are there? Who do you have, already as a teacher or in your kind of sphere or in your membership or whatever that might be better to the better to be teaching these things? Can you be prepping them to get classes done now? Even looking at, is there CE attachment? We know that drives, interest, even though this, I think, is going to drive interest unto itself because it impacts the day-to-day so much. But just start working forward on some of those and thinking about the industry and consumer impacts from an awareness standpoint. I think this is hypercritical for associations, and especially if they can be informed by good MLS data. I think we really need to tell the story that we touched on here, that our industry is going to be really impacted by these potential changes in terms of who has that opportunity to find their entrepreneurship in this space. If it's harder and harder for new entrants to come in, especially younger folks or maybe minorities who have a really solid sphere that's based in buyers rather than sellers, what does that do for the industry? And it's an industry, frankly, as we look at the data, that isn't as representative of the communities we serve as it should be. So there's that impact. And then if we start looking at home ownership, around 2/3 of folks right now have that home ownership capacity. And I know there's a debate, depending on your perspective on this, as to whether or not this impacts that, but I think it does. And I do think we need to be talking about the potential of that. If in fact we're pricing folks out or pushing people out of the marketplace, it's not a place where we need to be. And it's something we need to talk about instead of just how these specific changes might impact us and our revenue. So I think those become important. And then, develop your enhanced communication strategy that Liz already alluded to, and then get back to those grassroots advocacy pieces, not only in informing the industry about or rather consumers about the industry and consumer impacts, but talking to those at your state level. Be thinking about what kind of advocacy activities could be done to enhance the value of the association and the MLS combined. So with that, I think we've got about 120 point checklist that can be gone through here in order to help you prepare for this. even if it's a 5 or a 10-point checklist, even if you're just starting to look at those high level items that we talked about, whether it's your philosophy, your strategy, looking at your policies, your procedures, your technology, your education, your financial health, whatever it is, put a checklist together, start assessing yourself now so that you can make decisions in a proactive manner. So I think that's what we were wanting to convey in this today, Liz, and hopefully we did that in this little bit of a little LinkedIn video. Anything else I missed?
Don't think so. I think we got it all.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for your time. We appreciate it. You can see our contact information there. Reach out to myself or Liz. We're happy to help you work through what are those things you should be proactively identifying now, and also more than happy to share with you our checklist and or help you develop your own checklist. So thanks so much for your time today. Truly appreciate you. Go out and have a great rest of your Tuesday.